Thank you, Haley. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is February the 8th, and welcome to the Ways and Means Committee's afternoon bill hearings. First, we will begin with House Bill 309, Delegate Long. Whenever you're ready, Delegate Long.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Delegate Bob Long on testifying on HB 309, Baltimore County Homestead Property Tax Credit Notice Pilot Program. We started doing this, working on this bill a couple of years ago, actually in 2012, when the Homestead Property Tax Credit notification, you had to sign the paper and mail it back into SDAT. And what happened back in 2012, it had to be in by that year. A lot of people weren't aware that they had to fill out this piece of paper and mail it back in SDAT in order to get the homestead property tax credit. So we had a press conference, and anyway, we held it back for a year. So 2013, it finally come into play. I'm pretty sure that's the dates. But after doing some more research, we did SDAT research. We found over 8,200 properties in the zip codes of Essex, Dundalk, and Spears Point, and parts of Rosedale had not filed and received tax credit last year. But 4,700 properties did not apply, but were eligible. So some of those might have been rental properties or non-owner occupied properties. So we decided to further go into it and take action. We actually mailed out 300 letters to some constituents, letting them know that that they needed to fill out the homeowners tax credit, homestead property tax credit, that they had to fill it out and mail it back in. There was over we discovered the update from SDAT and discovered that over 60 of the 300 people were no longer on the list. So they applied and they took their name off the list. We also had 10 to 12 homeowners that called us to let them know to apply for the notification and walk them through it. So we did. So there's still, unfortunately, there's still people that have bought homes that are not aware of the application that they have to fill out. I know a lot of times they're given to them at settlement. It's part of their settlement package. And what happens is they go home and they forget to fill it out. Some attorneys will fill it out while they're sitting at the settlement table, but most of the times they send it home with them. And like everything else, it's in a big pile of papers. They put it up and they don't never mess with it again. One of the things that we found that when the application first came out, it was actually put into the tax bill. And most people don't pay their property taxes because the banks pay them. So they took their property tax bill and threw it up in the closet. So they weren't aware of it. So anyway, we're wanting to do this in Baltimore County. They just heard this bill last Friday, and they haven't voted on it yet. But I would ask for this committee to give us a favorable vote. We want to make sure people are getting the tax credits that's allowed them. And we want to make sure people's not allowed get it, don't get it. Because there is, unfortunately, we have some bad players out here and they're receiving it. It shouldn't be. Matter of fact, we had a gentleman that had a rental property on Wise Avenue where there was a murder. It was a murder-suicide took place, and I did some research. Come find out, he said it was an owner-occupied property. So he was trying to fly under the radar not only of SDAT but lead paint and Baltimore County rental registration. So that's what we're trying to achieve, is make sure that people that get it should get it, and the people shouldn't be getting it don't get it. Thank you.
Delegate Long. Are there any questions for Delegate Long? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony for House Bill 309. Next, we have Delegate Boyce, House Bill 310. Whenever you're ready, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Regina T. Boyce, presenting HB 310, Baltimore City Property Taxes Authority to Set Special Rates. You heard this bill last year in committee, and I'm hoping to appeal to you again to vet it and pass this bill. The bill authorizes Baltimore City to set special property tax rates for any class or subclass of real property subject to the city's property tax beginning June 2022. The purpose is to provide the city with the ability to diversify how it taxes different classes of real property. This bill would allow the city to, one, lower property taxes if they are able to, two, tax vacant and blighted property if they choose to with the authorization. Baltimore City's Department of Finance states that, of course, the city is always looking for ways to diversify its property tax base, especially if the goal is to reduce property tax. And more importantly, for residents who the tax rate has been a financial obstacle. HB 310 can assist the city with growth of the market by forcing irresponsible and negligent owners of vacant and blighted property to rehab, to sell, or demo. Washington, D.C., real property tax rates are based on class and subclasses of property. The city, the District of Columbia has 4 classes of property with 3 subclasses under their Class 2 rate. An example, I won't bore you too much with the details because it is in my written testimony, but for instance, their real property multifamily tax rate is 85 cents per $100 assessed, but then within their commercial and real estate, or commercial and industrial real property taxes, which includes hotels and motels, they've got 3 separate categories based on the property amount between 5 to 10 million, and then 10 million and more. And then they have an assessed value for vacant and blighted property. Vacant is $5 for every $100 assessed, and $10 for every $100 assessed for blighted property. As you know, the city has the highest property rate, 2.248% in the state, along with the highest poverty rate of 21%. It is a place where people want to be and where they want to live. According to Live Baltimore, in 2020, during the height of the pandemic, the city sold more houses, 9,476 of them, than in previous years, 9,213. But most importantly, it sold more homes in 2020 than it had in the last 10 years. The city needs tools that will attract new residents and businesses. DC and its suburb counterpart, Montgomery County, has the lowest residential property tax rate, 85 cents per $100 assessed, and 77%, along with higher property tax, property value, median income, and lower rates of poverty. DC residents and families have the lowest overall tax burden in the metropolitan area. And I do want to preference and say that, most importantly, we do a lot to attract businesses and people to the city, but we have to admit, for the last decades, this property, for instance, property tax rate has been incredibly high, and the people who live there, the people who work there, the people who do business there are the ones that are essentially holding down the city. And most importantly, this is less about, I would say, trying to attract people, but most importantly, how do we give the people who've been essentially holding the tax base for a long time, give them some relief, while at the same time holding those accountable who haven't been accountable to their properties in the city. But most importantly, in doing so, I think we will attract the bodies we need to have more individuals paying the tax base. And with that, committee, I urge a favorable report.
Can't hear you.
I can't hear you, Madam Chair.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, I was saying that concludes the testimony on House Bill 310. Thank you, Delegate Boyce. Oh, you have a question, Delegate Long?
Yes, I just want to clarify. So what you're saying is that vacant properties, you want to actually raise the taxes, property taxes on those properties?
So Delegate Long, that's a great question. So this bill authorizes the city to use this tool to set different tax rates per class of property if they choose to. So in the case of DC, for instance, their vacant and blighted property has a certain assessed value. But what happens is that they can set certain parameters so that it's not all, for instance, vacant properties. For instance, if you've got a set of properties that's going through acquisition right now, and you don't want to, put them in a position where they lose in the process of acquiring these properties and rehabbing, they would be able to be set under different requirements so that they could be able to hold up to their end, finish the acquisitions, and then move forward with rehab. So yes and no, where it's not necessary, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. I think I figured it out.
Okay.
Questions for Delegate Boyce? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 310. Thank you, Delegate Boyce.
Thank you so much.
Next, Delegate Long, House Bill 332, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a Baltimore County delegation bill. It has to do with Baltimore County property tax homeowners property tax credit supplement. I'm sure you've heard this bill, several has. For you, those that hasn't, the limit right now is $60,000 for combined income. And that limit was set back in 2006. And I came up with a modest inflation number of, I believe, 2 or 3%, whatever it was. Anyway, we want to raise the income to $72,000. The limit for the property taxes is still, the value of the property is still $300,000. This would just raise the income of jointly of up to $72,000. And it's a scale, if you look at on page 3 of the bill, it scales up the amount of how much tax credit they would get. And it would, like I said, the same calendar year would be $72,000 of their annual income. And that's what this is for, is to help our seniors stay in their properties and people that are on fixed incomes, people that are struggling from day to day, just to be able to maintain, keep their properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Long. Are there any questions for Delegate Long? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 332. Moving on to Prince George's County Delegation Bill, House Bill 394, and Delegate Nick Charles. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the record, this is Delegate Nick Charles, Chairman of the Prince George's County House Delegation. Before you all on House Bill 394, which is Prince George's County Municipal Tax Set-Off, School Facility Surcharge, and Public Safety and Behavioral Health Surcharge reports. This bill was voted unanimously out of the Prince George's County House Delegation. And just for your edification, I'll give you some understanding to the bill. It's a simple bill that adjusts the county's required reporting dates for 3 surcharges to align with our county reporting requirements, adjusting the municipal set-off, school facility, and public safety surcharge dates. County government can ensure comprehensive data is available and provide consistencies. The bill shifts the following dates of the municipal tax set-offs report changing from January 31st to October 31st. The school facility surcharge report will change from August 31st to October 31st. And the public safety and behavioral health surcharge report will change from March 1st to October 31st. So we're just moving everything to all be centralized to one particular date. And the benefit of this, it creates the consistency for the county's office of budget to compile similar reports all at the same time. With that being said, I ask that you move with a favorable vote of support for this bill that was voted unanimously by the Prince George's County House Delegation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 394. Moving on to House Bill 522, St. Mary's County Delegation Bill, Delegate Matt Morgan, welcome.
Hey, welcome. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see Ways and Means Committee so early in the session. Delegate Matt Morgan, for the record, on House Bill 522. This bill is unbelievably simple. In St. Mary's County, we were getting quite a deal when we would auction tax sales of properties. The auctioneer was charging us $3 a property sale. Unfortunately, after using that service for decades, our new auctioneer is charging us $10. So county commissioners and the delegations thinks that we probably should raise that to $10 to offset the actual cost of that. So I would request, happy to answer any questions and request a favorable report.
Questions for Delegate Morgan with his very simple bill, which I have learned whenever you, famous last words.
But this
Famous
one's
last-
actually true.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 522. Thank you.
Good seeing you all.
Next, calling House Bill 488, Delegate Feldmark. And I think there are 5 witnesses, so whenever you're ready, Delegate Feldmark, you can begin, and the witnesses will have 2 minutes each.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And good afternoon, committee members. For the record, I'm Delegate Jessica Feldmark. Pleased to be with you this afternoon presenting House Bill 488. I know this committee is already familiar with the benefits of public campaign financing. We know that small donor matching programs help limit the influence of large political donors, increase public engagement and confidence in our political process, and expand access for many more community members to consider running for office. In 2013, the General Assembly authorized the governing body of a county to establish public campaign financing for local elected offices in the executive and legislative branches of county government. Several jurisdictions have already adopted such programs. Montgomery County has a public campaign financing program that began operating in the 2018 elections. Howard County has a program operating for its first time in these upcoming 2022 elections. Baltimore City's program will be available for the 2024 elections, and both Baltimore County and Prince George's County will have programs in place for the 2026 elections. Now, House Bill 488 would simply authorize those jurisdictions who have adopted public campaign financing for their local offices to have the option of expanding those programs to include state offices elected at the county level. I do have several witnesses here, so I'm going to keep my intro short, but ask for your favorable report and happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. And I see my county exec on here, so I'm going to go out of order and call you first. Great to see you, Mr. County Executive.
Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair. It is always so good to see you. Thank you and Vice Chair Washington and the members of the Ways and Means Committee. As was noted, I'm Howard County Executive Calvin Ball, and it's a pleasure and honor to be with you this afternoon. I would first like to express my appreciation for Delegate Feldmark's consistent leadership on public campaign financing equity. Lack of access to raising campaign funds should not preclude candidates for other county offices who seek to serve their community. I'm pleased that House Bill 488 would expand opportunity for public campaign financing to all local races. Candidates running for Board of Education, state's attorney, sheriff, register of wills, judge of the circuit court, clerk of the court, and judge of the orphans court should have the same access to our current public financing model. Throughout my career, I've been a steadfast supporter of publicly funded political campaigns. As a member of our county council, I supported ballot question A, in which Howard County voters overwhelmingly supported the establishment of a public financing campaign system. I then voted for Council Bill 30, 2017, which created our Citizens Election Fund. And although the bill was later vetoed by the former county executive, several council colleagues and I successfully overrode that veto to ensure that in 2022, public financing will become a reality. After being elected, my administration established Howard County's fund in my first budget as county executive in 2019. Since then, our county council and I have dedicated $1.25 million to ensure the viability of the Citizens Election Fund for all county executive and county council candidates, even in the midst of a pandemic. In my continued commitment to the Citizens Election Fund, I co-sponsored bipartisan legislation with all 5 council members in Howard County to support emergency legislation that will clarify the process of how the program is administered in Howard County. In fact, just last night, Council Bill 11 passed our county council unanimously and will disperse funds immediately to all eligible candidates. And I signed that bill into law just before addressing you this afternoon. I fought to make this program a reality, and with the leadership of Delegate Feldmark, I hope that public financing can be expanded for all elected county races up and down the ballot. Publicly funded elections are good for democracy, and enabling accessibility for all is good for our community. I appreciate your consideration, and I respectfully request a favorable report on House Bill 488. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. And Delegate Feldmark is calling out the big hitters because now she has County Executive Johnny O from that other county, from Baltimore County. Welcome, Mr. County Executive.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to join you and to follow my good friend and colleague, County Executive Ball. But Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Washington, members of the Ways and Means Committee, I am Baltimore County Executive Johnny Olszewski. Proud to be here in support of House Bill 488. Thank you, Delegate Feldmark, for bringing this bill forward. I just want to echo what County Executive Ball said and what Delegate Feldmark has said to you. Fair, competitive elections are good for democracy, and they make our community stronger. But for too many people, the cost associated with running a campaign has become a significant barrier to public office. And we know that all parts of our government should be open and accessible to residents, including our elections. And we should do everything we can to create a level playing field so that everyone can participate. I want to thank the General Assembly for the work done to date so that county councils and county executives like County Executive Ball and myself have been able to put forward these local systems. When I took office, I made it a priority to implement public financing for local elections in Baltimore County. And we did that because we don't believe money should be a barrier for running for office. And the volume of one's voice shouldn't be determined by the size of their wallet. I'm proud to say that this past December, we did pass that local legislation to enact that system. This was something that came after a resounding vote in support of such a program by Baltimore County residents in our 2020 election. And now, because of those actions, candidates running for county executive and county council will have access to that public financing in 2026. We know that this will make our elections more competitive. We also know this will encourage more women and minority candidates to run for offices. But we know that we can go further by applying the standard of equitable access to even more local offices. And that's why I'm thrilled to be here today to endorse Delegate Feldmark's legislation, expanding that list of local governments, offices of which local governments are authorized to include in their system. So thank you for the time, and I respectfully ask for a favorable report of House Bill 488. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, for 2 minutes, Joanne Antoine, please.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Atterbury, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Joanne Antoine, Executive Director of Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 488. I first just want to thank both county executives for coming out in support of this legislation, and obviously for working closely with us, not only to pass, reforms in Baltimore County, but to implement and make fixes and ensure programs are ready for this election cycle. So we are grateful for your leadership and for working with us on making changes. As you all are well aware, Maryland really is considered a champion, a leader on small donor public financing. As those before me have said, we've got 5 jurisdictions with working programs, 2 of them currently in use, as well as a newly modernized and funded gubernatorial fair campaign financing fund, which is being used this election cycle as well. And we honestly, at this point, we expect other jurisdictions to follow suit. Anne Arundel County had a resolution that unfortunately failed to pass the council last night. But we know that even there, efforts have not ended to get this on the ballot here in Maryland, or I should say in Anne Arundel County. I think as we're working on these campaigns, one of the questions we get asked the most from community leaders, grassroots organizations is why not expand to cover other offices? And, you know, while a priority on Common Cause's end is making sure that these programs, while they're put in place, that they're properly implemented and funded, you know, we see no issue with jurisdictions expanding once a program has been used. I think expansion after first use ensures that we've made fixes where needed and that we've got the proper funding in place. And again, I think what's important here is that it's up to the jurisdiction and whether or not they want to expand. And again, we support all offices. I see them that I'm out of time. I just want to flag that I'm going to send you all a report that just came out around the Office of the Sheriff and how public financing can really help make some critical changes there, where we found a ton of conflicts here in Maryland when we're looking at all 24 jurisdictions. So I urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Edward Fishman, please, for 2 minutes. You're on mute.
Very good. Sorry. Thank
No
you very
problem.
much, Chair Atterbury and Vice Chair Washington and the members. My name is Ed Fishman, and I sit on the Our Revolution Maryland State Steering Committee, and I'm chair of our Montgomery County chapter. I want to thank you for the opportunity to address you on this critical legislation to advance the cause of limiting the pernicious influence of big money in our politics. The sums raised and spent in this country by candidates are astronomically higher than anywhere else, and that leaves voters with the impression that candidates and thus legislators are bought and sold. The 2018 primary campaign in Montgomery County was such a breath of fresh air because of the advent of public matching. The eventual winner in our county executive race was able to overcome millions of dollars spent by a wealthy, self-funded opponent. We also had an at-large council race with 34 candidates where the 4 winners all relied on public matching, as did 2 of the next 3 highest vote getters in that race. We at Our Revolution have advocated to expand the program to other races, in particular the Board of Education, which can be almost as consequential as the council. As much as candidates need the financial help, voters may benefit even more. Most voters go to the polls knowing nothing or next to nothing about most local races on the ballots. Many simply choose not to vote at all or not to vote in those races. Expanding public financing will enable candidates just to get the message out and also will engage the voters in their campaigns and contributing to them. You know, Montgomery County's 2018 primary showed that public financing is hardly a cure-all for all ills, but it was very empowering for the candidates and the voters alike. Our turnout was up about 40% over the prior elections. So let's build on that by allowing counties to fund all races. For that reason, we ask respectfully for a favorable report. While it's simply enabling legislation, most voters will soon demand that their county governments adopt a system in their locales. That isn't to be feared. It should be embraced by all those who believe in representative democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next for 2 minutes, Kevin Canali, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in strong support of House Bill 488. I agree that Delegate Feldmark has been a leader here, and we thank her for bringing this bill forward. Thank you to County Executives Olszewski and County Executive Ball. I think you've heard from them the influence and the power that something like this can have in a county. And we certainly appreciate that this is enabling legislation. That way we have the opportunity to opt in if it fits the interests of the particular county and the wishes of the constituents in which that county serves. So again, I think that the proper guardrails here, making sure that you've gone through the motions and you've done this for local offices before expanding it to state offices makes sense. But we certainly appreciate having another tool in our toolbox. It's another way that we can serve our residents effectively and answer their call if they do have concerns and they'd like to see this happen. So again, strong support of House Bill 488, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Our first question is from our Majority Leader, Delegate Lukey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for County Executive Olszewski, and it's an important question, so I hope he thinks carefully about his answer. Sir, you served, I think, on 3 different committees in the House of Delegates. Which one was the best?
Really, Mr. Majority Leader? I'll put it this way. I look very fondly upon my memories serving on the Fine and Fighting Ways and Means Committee. So I believe I served on other committees, which were great too, but really enjoyed my time on Ways and Means.
Appreciate that, Mr. County Executive.
I may end up in other committees this session, so, you know.
I totally understand.
Ways and Means is awesome, though.
Other actual questions for any of the panel? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 488. Thank you all very much. Delegate Wilkins, House Bill 320. It's all you whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. For the record, I am Delegate Janelle Wilkins presenting House Bill 320, which deals with residency requirements. The goal of this bill is to specify factors to be considered when the State Board of Elections or a court determines whether a candidate for the General Assembly meets the residency requirements under the Maryland Constitution. So some of the examples of factors that can be considered under this bill are the address on their state issued identification card or driver's license, where the person receives mail, utility bills, and other factors that are listed in the bill. It's important to note that this bill does not impose any additional requirements. It just simply provides criteria to consider if residency is being contested. As you know, candidates are required to be at least 25 years of age to run for office in the Senate, 21 years of age to run for office in the House, and they have to be a resident of the state for at least a year prior to the election, and a resident of the district that they represent for at least 6 months prior to the election. There are 13 factors for consideration that are listed in the bill for when a board or court is determining residency. Again, this only applies to House and Senate candidates. So this is only our General Assembly. It only applies to General Assembly. So I think this bill is a great starting point for how we clarify factors that determine residency. And the passage of this bill would help ensure that members of the General Assembly are in compliance with residency requirements and that we continue to be true representatives for our constituents. I urge a favorable report on House Bill 320.
Delegate Wilkins, are there any questions? And I should say, as always, we thank members of the State Board of Elections, Jared Demarinis and Mary Wagner for being here. If you have any questions for either of them as well. Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 320. Moving on to House Bill 525, Delegate Ben Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations on your new post. I haven't been in front of you, so congratulations. And I would like to point out for the majority leader that County Executive Olszewski was never on appropriations, so I'm not sure he can really answer that question. So before I waste too much of your time, I just got off the phone, or else I would have done this in advance, with our council chair in Prince George's County. We had a great conversation about the necessity of this piece of legislation, and he actually promised to move it forward at the council level, which is fine. We don't need to do it at the state level if we can do it at the council level. And with that, I'm going to get together a letter of withdrawal for you all and take this off your plate.
Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Barnes? Okay.
All right.
Thank you,
Madam
Delegate
Chair.
Barnes.
And I'll thank the council as well. Thank you.
Okay, House Bill 498, Delegate Washington. There are two witnesses. Whenever you're ready, Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Alonzo Washington here to present on House Bill 498. The purpose of this legislation is to prohibit the use of contributor information for commercial solicitations. The State Board of Elections informed me that they have received numerous questions regarding the use of contributor information on the campaign finance reports. These inquiries focused on whether the publicly available online contribution information of an individual may be used for commercial solicitations by a vendor. The proposed legislation prevents contributor information from being used for commercial solicitation, including the publication of this information through an intermediary media outlet, if the sole intent and purpose of the publication was to circumvent the commercial solicitation prohibition. This is a simple piece of legislation, Madam Chair, and I ask for a favorable report on this bill.
Every time I hear simple, because coming from my former committee, I'm sure Delegate Griffith will concur. You heard simple and then you would get like 5 million questions. But new committee, new times. Good stuff. Okay. Moving on. Jared Demarinis, whenever you're ready.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Delegate Washington, I just want to say thank you for sponsoring this legislation. This was a departmental bill for the State Board of Elections. He summed it up correctly. What the intent is, it's to protect contributor information. As you know, it's not just the name, but we have the name, address, and sometimes employer and occupation information that is now on our website. So this is valuable information that should not be used for commercial solicitations, but be used for its true purpose, which is disclosure and to inform voters of how you raise and spend your money. So with that, I thank you, and I look for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the Vice Chair or Mr. Demarinis? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 498. Moving on to House Bill 328, Delegate Jones, and you have 3 witnesses, so Delegate Jones, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chairwoman. 328. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Washington, and fellow members of the Ways and Means Committee, for the record, I am Delegate Dana Jones. I come before you today with a bill that would help our state and local boards of elections make voting more accessible to voters. Finding locations for early voting can be tedious and difficult. The State Board of Election, SBE, must take a long list of factors into consideration when evaluating each location, including high-speed internet, parking availability, a backup power source, cell phone reception quality, access to landlines, and if the facility is large enough to accommodate the check-in and voting process. Community centers throughout the state, such as any American Legions, Veteran of Foreign Wars, all of these halls meet many of the requirements laid out by SBE and would be perfect polling locations. However, these establishments often serve alcohol, and current state law bars early voting centers in any building or part of any building used or occupied by an establishment that holds an alcoholic beverage license. Even if the establishment would cease the sales of alcohol during the day where voting would take place. The current law does not allow for the nuances that can often go into choosing a polling location. This is an issue that is best suited for regulations discussed and designed by the state board, which SBE gives better insight into each unique individual situation rather than having rigid laws and overriding their discretion. Additionally, I'm offering 2 amendments that would make this an emergency piece of legislation to ensure that these new standards are in effect for the upcoming election cycle, and to clarify that SBE must adopt regulations that govern the use of buildings with an alcoholic beverage license as polling locations. I respectfully urge a favorable report on this bipartisan bill to make voting more accessible here in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Morgan Drayton for 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Morgan Drayton, Policy and Engagement Manager for Common Cause Maryland, and we are in support of HB 328. The U.S. Election Assistance Commission reported that more than 230,000 polling places were used in the 2018 general election, with less than 1% of those locations being election offices. So the vast majority of polling sites are in public buildings like schools and churches. And while Maryland law requires that public buildings be used for polling sites unless there are none that are suitable, it also strictly prohibits polling places from being within 100 feet of a location where alcohol is served to the public. So this means that otherwise prime locations in terms of accessibility, like malls or multi-purpose arenas, are ineligible currently to be used as polling sites. So HB 328 would remedy this by removing these outdated prohibition-era restrictions from our state's law books and create new options for polling sites on election day that will likely help alleviate the strain that we have on our pre-existing polling locations. So we really believe this is common sense legislation that will make the process of voting more convenient and accessible for all eligible Maryland voters. And for that reason, we recommend a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Catherine Berry for 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Berry. I am here representing the Maryland Association of Election Officials. I just would like to say thank you to Delegate Jones for bringing this bill to the attention of the committee. I concur with everything that she said, so in the interest of time, I will yield over to the next person to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, David Garris for 2 minutes, please. I think you're on mute. Still on mute. You can't hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I'm sorry for that. I apologize.
That's okay.
Thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak. I am the election director for Anne Arundel County, Maryland, as well as the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials. I would just like to testify in favor of this bill for the same reasons that my previous speakers have already listed. We're in support of increasing the available locations, the way you can schedule early voting. It's very difficult to schedule a location for 10 days, 1 month, and then 6 months later, another 10 days. So having more flexibility and more options for scheduling early voting would be critical for us as election officials, and I believe it would be very, very helpful for the local communities, helping us put convenient locations for voting near all the voters. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the hearing for House Bill 328. Delegate Jones, don't go anywhere. House Bill 327, Delegate Jones, and there are 4 witnesses. So whenever you're ready, Delegate Jones.
Thank you so much, Chair Atterbury. Chairwoman, Vice Chair, and fellow members of the Ways and Means Committee, for the record, I am Delegate Dana Jones. Again, I come before you today to introduce a bill that would ensure election workers are fairly compensated for their essential work. Currently, local boards of election are not required to pay election workers a minimum wage. There is no statewide floor. In many counties, the qualifications to be a judge specifically state that they should be physically and mentally able to work at least a 15-hour day. If judges did work a 15-hour day, they would only be making 11 hours in Anne Arundel County to $5 out in Allegheny County. For an example, in Anne Arundel County, all election judges are compensated $165 to $225, depending on the position for their services. In Prince George's County, election judges are paid $200. Again, out in the West, we can have as much as just 80, as little as 80. With these long hours and frankly, shamefully low wages, it is no wonder that many local boards of elections face difficulty in trying to recruit election workers. Just last month, my local board of elections reached out to the Anne Arundel County delegation to state that, quote, one of the most difficult tasks when preparing for an election is recruiting and hiring election judges, and noted that they are still in need of 650 additional workers before the upcoming election. Ensuring that Marylanders are paid a minimum wage is the very least we should do for these who facilitate the very foundation of our democracy. Our state's policies are a reflection of our values. If we continue to pay our essential election workers less than we pay any other employee in our economy, what does that say about the importance we place on those who administer our most treasured democratic right? I respectfully urge a favorable report on this bill. And there is a panel here. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you. Next, Morgan Drayton, please, for 2 minutes.
Hello again. For the record, Morgan Drayton, Common Cause Maryland, and we are in support of HB 327, establishing minimum daily compensation for election judges at $200 per day. Our election judges play such a critical role in our democracy that it's only right that they should be compensated fairly. And we also believe that this legislation would be a step towards increasing the number of trained election judges recruited and retained across the state. So in the past, jurisdictions like Baltimore City and Montgomery County have had issues recruiting judges, which leads to long lines on election day. In the 2020 election, Maryland faced a shortage of 14,000 election judges. We want to acknowledge that many jurisdictions have indeed gone well above the base floor pay proposed here. But HB 327 provides incentive for people to volunteer for this position and would put an end to the high variability of pay rates across counties. So for example, Charles County's chief judges are paid just $160 per day, while Allegheny County's chief judges are paid $225, though Charles County is larger than Allegheny County. So HB 327 would help bring in and retain these election judges in Maryland that are so critical to our democracy, and that will make the voting process more secure, easier, and more accessible to all. And for those reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Catherine Berry, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, again, my name is Catherine Berry. I'm the election director in the Carroll County Board of Elections and representing the Maryland Association of Election Officials. Again, we would like to thank Delegate Jones for sponsoring this very important legislation. Generally, there are about 12 counties that have certain election judges who make under $200. So this would help to even out the playing field, break down some barriers on recruitment efforts of election judges. We recognize that there can be a fiscal burden on this for the local jurisdictions, but we hope that everyone can agree that keeping our democracy strong by having informed election judges who want to work, who feel incentivized to work, is the most important thing that we could have happen. We recognize that they work very long hours. There has been an increase in the amount of experience and knowledge that election judges have to have when they are working with voters. So this would certainly help our efforts at the local boards of elections. I also would like to note that we did ask for this to not become effective until the 2024 election because our local budgets have already been submitted. So with that, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Next, David Guerreras for 2 minutes, please.
Hi, thank you committee members for the opportunity to speak. For the record, I am the director of Anne Arundel County Board of Elections, as well as the president of the Maryland Association of Election Officials. I will echo what my colleagues have already stated. Also, thank you to Delegate Jones' office for the work she's done on this legislation, but we do think it would be extremely helpful to ensure that the election judges throughout the state are all compensated fairly. They're all extremely valuable. Recruiting and retaining election judges is extremely difficult. I think that the election process overall can only be helped if we can retain experienced, knowledgeable election judges from election to election, and paying them fairly and above minimum wage is an excellent way to demonstrate our commitment to that. So with that, I yield the rest of my time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm here for questions.
Thank you. Next, Kevin Canali, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 327 with amendments. So I certainly appreciate Delegate Jones bringing this bill forward, and we certainly agree that retaining and recruiting election judges has proven to be difficult. However, I think that the state, we just want the state to come to the table here, and we feel like we're willing to play ball here, and we want to make sure that we're compensating people fairly. But I think that the state can do a little bit more as well, and that's basically what we're asking here. So I think this is a bigger conversation in the counties that already meet this threshold. They still have problems recruiting and retaining. I think it's a bigger issue than just pay. I think we need to have a broader conversation. I mean, we have a initiative to protect our local election officials from threats and intimidation. And obviously in this climate, I mean, that's a part of this, right? And the pandemic certainly has made people leery of going in and working in this very challenging environment, particularly when you have a public health emergency on our hands. So again, I think that we're more than willing to come to the table here, and we'd like to talk about this with the committee and how we can move something forward that can compensate people in a fashion that the General Assembly wishes to do without putting all of the burden onto county government. So with that, Madam Chair, again, we're happy to work with the committee and with Mayo and with all of the relevant stakeholders to find a solution here, but we just would ask that the state also play a role here in making sure that this burden is not only on the county government. So with that, we'd ask for a favorable report on House Bill 327 with amendments.
Are there any questions for the bill sponsor or any of the witnesses?
Chair Atterbury?
Yes.
I apologize. I forgot to mention something. I just wanted to state that I am appreciative of the Office of the Attorney General. To my colleagues, there has been, the Office of the Attorney General did have a letter of support you will find in your floor system. I apologize.
Questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 327. Moving on to Delegate Jones again, House Bill 340. And we have some members of the Judiciary Committee joining us. Welcome, Delegates Cardin, Delegates Toll, and I don't see Delegate Shoemaker, but he is supposed to be joining us as well. So whenever you're ready, Delegate Jones.
Thank you. HB 340. Chair Atterbury, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Dana Jones. I come before you today to introduce a bill that would strengthen our campaign finance laws and gives prosecutors the tools they need to hold those who maliciously break those laws accountable. The State Board of Elections, SBE, is diligent about protecting those who unknowingly commit campaign finance violations and works closely with violators to help bring their campaign finance accounts into compliance. However, for more complicated violations, SBE works with the State Prosecutor's Office to do a deeper investigation. This process can take well over a year, which often leaves the prosecution with little time to actually bring the charges against those malicious actors who have intentionally undermined our campaign finance laws. This bill would extend the time frame in which prosecutors can complete investigations and prosecution from 3 to 4 years. This extra year ensures that the prosecutor's office has enough time to conduct a full investigation and bring the case to trial if needed. Additionally, in 2013, SBE was granted civil enforcement authority for minor technical violations by political committees. However, the law did not grant the civil enforcement authority for the minor technical violations for Title 14, persons doing public business, to SBE. This bill would simply make up for this oversight and clarify this authority. It also makes the application of the law for disclosure violations uniform across the election article. Finally, HB 340 strengthens penalties against the willful violators by forbidding anyone from running for office who has outstanding unpaid campaign finance penalties accrued in the last 5 years, increasing the maximum civil penalty for each campaign finance violation from $500 to $1,000 for campaign finance entity for each one. Finally, criminal penalties from $1,000 to $25,000 for criminal penalties related to non-disclosure by business entities. This increase makes the penalties for business entities commensurate with the criminal penalties for political committees in Title 13. SBE plays such an important role in government oversight, and it is important that we give them the proper tools to do so. I respectfully urge a favorable report on this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Joanne, Antoine, please.
Yes, good afternoon again, Chair Atterbury and members of the committee. For the record, Joanne Antoine with Common Cause Maryland, testifying in support of House Bill 340, which gives the State Board of Elections and the State Office of the State Prosecutor greater authority when enforcing our campaign finance laws. I'm going to keep my testimony brief since I think SBE and OSP can speak to this better than I can. I just say, as I think collectively we understand that our campaign finance laws can be really complex, especially for the first-time candidate, the treasurer who is trying to navigate tracking donations, expenses, and overall reporting requirements. And even when they're paying great attention to detail, mistakes are made. And I think this is where the State Board of Elections does a great job of trying to work with these individuals to bring their committees to compliance. But we also have bad actors that set out to circumvent our campaign finance laws. And there needs to be an adequate process in place for holding these individuals accountable. Putting greater penalties and enforcement authority in place will hopefully discourage these types of actions and violations and others from working to undermine these laws and overall transparency in the process. I think extending the statute of limitations from 4 years instead from 3 years to 4 allows for more thorough investigations and audits, more time for the state board as they're navigating thousands of campaign reports to work with these individuals before violations are reported to the state prosecutor for further investigations. I just end by saying, the General Assembly has a responsibility here to the voters to ensure that there's greater accountability in these instances when bad actors are working to undermine our democracy. We strongly urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Sarah David, please, for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee and distinguished visitors from the Judiciary Committee. My name is Sarah David and I'm Deputy State Prosecutor for the Maryland Office of the State Prosecutor here in support of HB 340. The Office of the State Prosecutor is an independent office. We're tasked with investigating and prosecuting cases related to political corruption, including the crimes of misconduct in office, bribery, and of course, our election law violations throughout the state of Maryland. Our office is tasked with investigating and enforcing those violations. I'm joined here today by Senior Assistant State Prosecutor Lindsey Byrd, who handles the election law violations that come to our office. Last year, our office investigated over 500 election law cases, most of which are resolved through civil enforcement and some of which require criminal enforcement. We'd like to thank Delegate Jones for bringing this important legislation that highlights 2 important issues in election law violations that would benefit from this legislation. I'll be discussing the statute of limitations and Ms. Byrd will discuss the changes to Title 14. Should note that we rarely enforce election law violations through our criminal enforcement power. We reserve that power for cases that reveal true intent to undermine the process. Our goal is compliance. As every member of this committee knows, as you've all participated in an election in the state of Maryland, there are filing requirements for campaign transparency and regulations that exist to contribute to fairness in our election process. And we'd like to thank this committee for its leadership in promoting transparent and fair elections and believe that this is an important next step in the process. Many people with good intentions struggle to meet the requirements of the State Board of Elections, and we work with those individuals and campaigns to ensure that they can come into compliance. However, when there are crimes that can be detected through campaign finance, we find fraud, thefts, and other things that are uncovered through our partnership with the State Board of Elections and our investigative efforts. These cases come after a significant time has already elapsed, as the State Board of Elections has limited auditors and our office receives a suspicious report often after 1 or 2 years has already elapsed. Our investigations require forensic accounting, advanced technology, and the statute of limitations for 3 years allows for significant impropriety and even criminal behavior to go uncharged. An extension of that statute of limitations would allow for the detection of true fraud, and we would encourage a favorable report from this committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Lindsey Byrd.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Lindsey Byrd. I'm a Senior Assistant State Prosecutor at the Office of the State Prosecutor, and I handle our election law violations. I'm here in support of House Bill 340, which would enhance our ability to effectively enforce Title 14 of the election law article. Title 14 mandates that business entities that have a single contract of at least $200,000 with a government entity file statements with the State Board of Elections that lists their applicable campaign contributions. This provision was enacted to encourage transparency and to avoid corruption in the award of state contracts. Title 14 was seemingly meant to mirror Title 13, which regulates campaign finance activity, in which I know you, having run for office, members of the committee are probably more familiar. But while our office has the same criminal enforcement power over Title 14 as we do Title 13, we don't have the same civil enforcement power. So for example, in Title 13, when a campaign finance committee fails to file a campaign finance report on time, The State Board of Elections will levy late fees, and if the committee ultimately doesn't pay those fees or come into compliance, our office has the ability to issue a civil citation. In Title 14, if a business entity fails to file their statement, the State Board can levy fees. However, our office doesn't have the enforcement power, the civil enforcement power to issue a civil citation. So it renders the State Board's ability to issue late fees essentially meaningless with no enforcement provision. As a result, most violations of Title 14 are forced to go unaddressed, and this bill would close that loophole, allowing Title 14 to work as intended and to foster meaningful compliance and transparency in the award of government contracts. And we would like to thank Delegate Jones for bringing this important legislation, and would be happy to answer any questions from this committee. Thank you.
Next, Jared Demarinis, please.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Jones, for sponsoring this bill. This was, again, a State Board of Elections departmental bill. So I think Delegate Jones pretty much summed up all the major points there. This is really focusing on Title 14, which is persons doing state business. These are people that have contracts of $200,000 or more with the state, and to make sure that they're in compliance with all the disclosure requirements here. Additionally, the technical violations that the civil penalties that are part of this bill here to give the State Board some more civil enforcement authority is the correct venue. So this frees up the State Prosecutor's Office to really handle some of the more in-depth or bigger cases, and allows the State Board to handle the technical violations that we have with Title 13, so that they can focus on that. Like I said, these penalties increased from $1,000 to $25,000 for criminal penalties, and this is for the non-disclosure by business entities here. This is definitely in line with the current penalties that you face in Title 13 here. And these are businesses, once again, that have contracts of $200,000 or more and are doing state business here. So I think that everyone kind of went through all the purposes there. And for time, I'll ask for a favorable report and passage. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Our first question is from Delegate Wilkins.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Jones, for bringing this bill. I know you worked closely with folks who testified to help bring the best bill forward possible. As I was reading through, I do have a couple of questions. So as I was reading the bill, I thought that it was making sense. If you owe a civil penalty, you can't run for office, you're increasing the penalties. But as the bill went on, it got a bit intense and perhaps over my head around adjudication and all kinds of other things. And so I do want to, if you can, Jared, just sort of walk us through exactly how this would work for offenders. And if you can also say more about, is most of the issue that you're seeing is about people not paying the penalty at all, and then you see them continuing to run for office? So if you can just share more about the issue as well.
Okay, so thank you for the question, Delegate Wilkins. The first part is to allow the state prosecutor to have civil authority on failure to files for Title 14 violations. So a business that has a state contract of $200,000 or more has to file a contribution disclosure statement twice a year, once in May and once in November. And their penalties are $1,000, just like yours, for failure to file. These then basically go through the same machinations and processes that I do with you. I give them notices. I tell them that they're late. They have fee running. There's notice to show cause letters. In 2013, we basically had a law that said everything was supposed to be done in the same method and manner as Title 13. However, we did not expressly authorize the state prosecutor's office to have civil authority here. So there is a little bit of an issue when we refer these, I would say, non-compliant failure to file cases over to the state prosecutor's office, that instead of them going for criminal penalties, that they would like to seek civil penalties. And this expressly authorizes them to have that civil penalty provision. So that is the one element of the enforcement part. The one that basically affects the candidates and everything else here that is a part of this, and that would be you, is that under current law, a candidate or an individual cannot assume office if they owe the State Board of Elections late fees. Basically, if you're not in compliance or in good standing with the State Board, you can't be a candidate and you can't assume office. We actually certify before a person gets sworn in that they have paid, that they have filed all their reports and they owe us no money before you take the oath of office. So basically, this legislation here updates that to include any civil penalty that the State Board issues against the candidate. So the intent was to make sure that everyone was in compliance, in good standing with the State Board. But in 2013, we gave civil authority to us to fine individuals, bad actors, for technical violations. And then this basically would just move that into the provisions as well. So when a person either becomes a candidate or assumes office, you know that that individual is in good standing and has no fines whatsoever with the State Board. Not that they just filed their reports well, that they paid, if they've failed to include an authority line on their reports, if they've failed to maintain a bank account. These are all the technical violations now that that this individual has been a part of the process. So those are the two major parts there. And finally, the increase in the penalties. Late fees are $1,000, but all my civil penalties, late fees, and also if you fundraise during session, as everyone here is aware of, it's $1,000 fine. But all the other civil penalties were $500. And that was when the law was passed. That was the amount of late fees. So now this just makes it on par with the late fees and the penalties that you face for fundraising during session. So it makes it across the board for all civil penalties that the State Board issues, is that it's up to $1,000. So those are kind of the overall arching parts of it.
Thank you so much, Jared. Madam Chair, if it's okay, a quick follow-up question. Could you please explain, Jared, the adjudication parts of the bill? I wasn't understanding that connection. So someone they get the notice, they don't pay. We understand that you can't run. There seems to be some type of adjudication aspect that's in here, if you're able to share that part.
Sure. No matter what, and at any point, we issue civil citations or civil settlements. If an individual disagrees with it, there's always the day in court. So they can always go that method there and then seek a court order to either get the fine waived or to get the certification to become a candidate or to assume office. That has never been, we've never, eliminated that aspect of this. This is just kind of making sure so that they always have that out we're not the be all end all of the fine structure. It's just the beginning part of it. If they agree, they pay, everything moves forward. If not, we're always the ability to go to court, and then everyone has their say in that matter there.
Got it. Thank you so much.
I do see other questions. I do have to apologize. Nancy Saurian, I did not call on you, so I'm going to call on Ms. Saurian for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, and I will be very brief. I just wanted to be here because the League of Women Voters does support campaign finance regulations that enhance political equality for all citizens, ensure transparency, protect representative democracy from distortion by undisclosed contributions, and combat corruption. However, if these regulations are not enforceable because of statute of limitations or insufficient penalties, they are powerless to create the kind of ethical, fair campaigns where all candidates play by the same rules. So as you've heard about the many provisions in this bill, we would just like to say that we strongly support it. Thank you.
Delegate Cardin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to be back in Ways and Means and to see all my old friends here. Delegate Wilkins asked some really pointed questions, and I appreciate getting back into campaign finance. I don't know whether this is for Ms. David or Mr. Demarinis, but it seems as if, I have a couple of different questions. First is, an individual may not become a candidate for any public office if they haven't paid their civil penalties. Right now, it's if they have any fees that are outstanding, they can't. But you're saying that what this bill would do would be to say that if they have any outstanding civil penalties. Is that my understanding, Jared?
Yes, right. So that would, because we issue civil citations or civil penalties.
Right.
It's those enumerated offenses in 13604.1.
Has that ever been tested? I would assume that would already be captured in your authority that you have, but you're telling me that you don't believe that it's captured?
No, because the current law in 13333, it talks about just failure to file. And that's a failure to file a campaign finance report. This is different violations. I'm
just curious, have you ever tested it and tried to stop somebody if they have any outstanding civil penalties, or you just haven't gone there before?
We haven't gone there because we've kind of made calls to people to make sure that they have no penalties outstanding, but it's not something I would like to test without having full backing of the General Assembly on that beforehand.
Fair enough. And you're not permitted presently to send any outstanding civil penalties or fees to a collection unit, central collection unit? You're not permitted to do that right now?
We do send this, when we refer the matters over to the state prosecutor for failure to files, they can then send it over to the central collections unit for collections of the dollar amount. In 13604.1, we issue the civil penalties, and the collection of those violations go through the court matter, where we issue a civil citation and then go through that route.
But it has to go through the prosecutor's office in order for you to get it outside for collections, is what you're saying?
In both cases, yes, they're our enforcement agency.
Right. Section 14 or Title 14, I think you mentioned that this is only referring to businesses that have contracts of over $200,000 with the state. It doesn't, the change in the law doesn't refer to any other entities except for those?
It's $200,000.
$200,000, right.
And the change in the law under Title 14 is to really impose, to give civil penalty authority to the state prosecutor, the same civil penalty authority that they have currently under Title 13, which is what you have, that governs political committees. Additionally, the other part 2, which is to have the state board impose civil penalties over small enumerated offenses, similar to what we have in governing political committees as well, so that the state prosecutor we can maintain a little bit of the technical,
jurisdiction. I think that makes sense for efficiency purposes. My last question, Madam Chair, is the bill established, this is according to the fiscal note, the bill also establishes that a person may not willfully make false, fraudulent, or misleading statements on the entry in any filing that is under oath and is required under provisions governing disclosure of campaign contributions by a person doing public business. It doesn't already do that. You according to the law, you can make a willful fraudulent or a willfully fraudulent statement, or I'm not sure I understand what the fiscal note is saying there.
Everything, all these filings are under penalties of perjury, so I'll double check on the fiscal note on
right.
that.
It seems to me, so it says the bill also establishes that a person may not willfully make a false, fraudulent, or misleading statement or entry in any filing that is under oath and is required under provisions governing disclosure of campaign contributions by persons doing public business. It seems to me like that should already be under law. So I'm not sure why that's put in the fiscal note. But that being said, I just wanted to make that comment. Maybe we can look into that, Delegate Jones. But this is great stuff. I love it. I love this subject matter. Thank you.
Delegate Cardin. Delegate Lasanti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess my question is probably for the election board. Well, first of all, I'd like to just say that this is a very, very important election integrity bill. But I really want to drill down a little bit on, I guess, what I'll call the case management or the management of complaints and how long it takes to process them. Because I think that that's a very important element. So I guess my first question is, typically, how long does it take once a complaint is received to be able to do an investigation and make a determination as to whether it's going to go to the next level?
Well, I guess for the state board's complaints, these are small, minor infractions, but they do take some time here. We always allow, when we get the complaint, we always allow the complainant to respond to the allegations here to make sure that that's going on there. Sometimes they can get wrapped up relatively quickly. I would say sometimes we have complaints where we get it, for example, like an authority line. We ask for the material, we send it out, and sometimes the committee that was in violation of that comes back and goes, yes, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and here's the penalty, and we just go forward with it. Other times, during the course of an investigation or a review, things can pop up, such as, not having all their contributions or expenditures made, at which point then we involve the state prosecutor's office, because then it becomes an intent issue. Sometimes it's just, sloppy bookkeeping to actual theft of campaign funds, which we have seen in this state a few times here. So I would like to say that every investigation is wrapped up within X amount of days. It really depends on the fact pattern presented. We try to wrap up the small technical violations as quickly as possible and to move them forward. But sometimes when we discover something else, we involve the state prosecutor, and I know the state prosecutor involves us on some matters as well with regards to looking at campaign finance to get a broader picture on those things.
I think you answered the broader context of the question, and that was just by enlarging the time frame there. You are in contact from the very beginning with the campaign entity to say, hey, there's something going on here and we need to look into it.
Yes.
Right. So it's not, 4 years from now, somebody doesn't come back and say, oh, hey, by the way,
No.
you had something 3.5 years ago. That's the point, I guess, that I was trying to get to, is that this is an evolving process and that there's communication all the way through the various levels.
Yes, that's almost immediate. So yes.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the bill sponsor or the panel? Seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 340. Moving on to House Bill 428, Delegate Rosenberg, and welcome whenever you're ready.
I am ready. We are done with my responsibilities for the moment in HGO, and glad to return on legislation that this committee has reported to the floor in the past. This has to do with foreign manufacturer of electronic voting systems requiring the state board administrator, when he or she becomes aware of foreign material that is in any foreign component, in any product used by the state or by any local government, local board, any in the original manufacturing or in any modification, that be examined, and the relevant, the governor or the two presiding officers, and do it, be notified of its existence. This is modeled upon, taken from the bill, House Bill 1 that passed, HR 1, that passed the House of Representatives and died for want of a cloture in the Senate. We passed it out last year, unanimous out of the House, and it came back with a, if you will, to use an election analogy, it came back with a running mate from the Senate, they added another election bill to this bill, hoping that that would result in some movement on both bills, but in the committee, in its wisdom, chose not to do this. So this is a security bill dealing with closing an opportunity for foreign manufacturers to be dealing with the sanctity of our elections for truly committing fraud on the process. Preventive measure, committee has passed it out before, and I would urge you to do so again. Thank you.
Questions for Delegate Rosenberg? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Delegate Rosenberg. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 428. Moving on to House Bill 362, a Montgomery County delegation bill. And Delegate Julie Palkovich-Carr will be presenting that, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Delegate Julie Palkovich-Carr, here to present House Bill 362 on behalf of the Montgomery County House delegation. This is enabling legislation to allow Montgomery County to adopt ranked choice voting or approval voting for local elected offices. This local bill has unanimously passed the Montgomery County House delegation for several years and has the support of our county executive and county council. This committee has heard this bill repeatedly, but as a reminder, ranked choice voting allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference. Approval voting allows voters to select as many candidates as they support. 22 jurisdictions in America, including Tacoma Park in Montgomery County, used ranked choice voting in their most recent election. And 53 jurisdictions expect to use it in an upcoming election. Beyond simply providing more choice for voters, ranked choice voting and approval voting provide several advantages, including encouraging robust policy debates in which candidates must appeal to voters not just as their first choice, but as a second or third choice, deterring negative campaigning, and most importantly, resulting in more diversity among elected officials. People of color have won 60% of all ranked choice voting contests, and women have won more than 40% of all ranked choice voting contests in the United States. Notably, those statistics far outpace the Maryland General Assembly and other elected bodies in terms of diversity. I hope that Montgomery County will be given the opportunity to evaluate ranked choice and approval voting and to decide if either system is appropriate for use in their local elections. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 362. House Bill 344, Delegate Palkovich-Carr, and you have two witnesses, so whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. HB 344 aims to end pay to play in our elections. The bill would prohibit entities that do business with the state from making campaign contributions to candidates for certain state offices. As demonstrated by numerous surveys, Americans are concerned about the influence of campaign contributions on elections and their government. Voters across the political spectrum are concerned that there's too much money in politics and that political contributions have too much influence on politicians. Public opinion shows that reforms are needed to help improve people's trust in government. HB 344 proposes two reforms to our state's campaign finance laws. First, the bill would prohibit campaign contributions from state vendors with high dollar contracts to candidates for statewide offices. Given that the members of the Board of Public Works directly decide on which state contracts to approve, such political contributions are a direct conflict of interest and would be considered by some as pay to play. Recognizing this risk, the federal government prohibits direct and indirect contributions by federal contractors to federal candidates. Similarly, 15 states ban political contributions by state vendors, and 22 states ban all contributions by corporations. In other words, Maryland is an outlier for allowing these businesses to make political contributions. This change would be a meaningful one in terms of good government and public perception of state government. It is also a change that would not be deeply felt by candidates, as less than $90,000 was collectively contributed to statewide candidates during the 2018 election cycle by businesses that do business with the state. The second campaign finance proposal in the bill would prohibit political contributions from lobbyists registered with the state to candidates for state offices. Political contributions from lobbyists are not equivalent to contributions made by Maryland residents. Lobbyists are being paid to do a job, and their livelihood is directly dependent on their relationship with lawmakers. Contributions made by lobbyists are not just to support a candidate, but also to curry favor with that candidate. Previous laws passed by the General Assembly acknowledge the potential corrupting influence of lobbyists in the campaign finance system. For instance, Maryland currently prohibits a lobbyist from serving as a campaign treasurer, or from serving on a fundraising committee, or organizing or establishing a political committee, or even forwarding a candidate's solicitation for political contributions. We need to ask ourselves why it's okay under current law for a lobbyist to write a check to a candidate, but it isn't okay for them to forward an email to ask someone else to write a check. 5 states currently prohibit lobbyists from making campaign contributions. An additional 9 states prohibit lobbyist contributions during certain periods of time. This bill would prohibit political contributions from lobbyists registered with the state to any candidate for an office they are registered to lobby. An exception is provided in the bill to allow a lobbyist to contribute to the campaigns of legislative candidates in the district where they live. Notably, the bill would not take effect until the next election cycle. In conclusion, this legislation will reduce the potential for political corruption and help the voices of voters to have more weight in elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Joanne Antoine, please, for 2 minutes. Are you still with us, Ms. Antoine? Okay, I will call Nancy Saurian, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Nancy Saurian, President of the League of Women Voters of Maryland. My testimony will be brief. I just wanted to say that prohibiting making or accepting contributions in circumstances where the contributor has something to gain from the candidate would eliminate the possibility that financial contributions impact policy decisions or decision regarding the awarding of contracts. Financial incentives for the office holder should have no place in making policy or awarding contracts. It's for this reason that we support HB 344. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call Ms. Antoine one more time. Okay, with that, we will take questions. I see Delegate Buckle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Polakovich-Carr, you said that there are 5 states that do this, and I, as you well know, I trust your research better than I trust mine. I just did it quickly on my phone. I found 1 or 2. I just had a concern, I'm going to use a Supreme Court case that I'm sure some members of the committee will hate to hear the words, but my recollection is under the Citizens United case, the Supreme Court has determined that political campaign contributions equate essentially to political speech, and that corporations and entities are entitled to make those contributions, that you can have certain reasonable restrictions. It's subject to a rule of reason about limitations. We obviously have a $6,000 per person or per entity cap. But do you have a concern that by saying that someone by dint of their profession cannot make a political contribution, that would run afoul of any type of constitutional prohibitions? That's why I was trying to find the 5 states that did it, if anyone had ever challenged it. We have a restriction that casinos and casino employees can't donate, yet despite the fact that if you're on the HGO committee, the makers of opioids can contribute to those members, but a publicly traded corporation that owns a casino can't contribute. I've always contended that that's likely unconstitutional. Just, who's got the time and interest in bringing the case? And I wonder if it's the same situation of, is this something that's a problem, but just no one really has the incentive to bring the case?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it's a good one, actually. So the 5 states that currently have the law are Alaska, California, Kentucky, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And in several of those states, they actually have had their laws challenged in court. I believe it was in California's case of where their original law was overturned by the court. They came back with something much narrower. Initially, I believe in California's case, they were saying all lobbyists couldn't give, period. And when that was overturned, California came back with something more tailored that said, and it's the approach, in fact, that this bill takes and that the other states take, which is lobbyists can't give to candidates for offices that they're registered to lobby. There has to be a direct nexus there. So just because you're a registered lobbyist, but if you only register, say, to lobby the executive branch, that shouldn't prohibit you from giving to a legislative candidate. And so that's the approach that this bill takes here. I will note that, lobbyist disclosures are public through the Ethics Commission, and so you can actually see these things. While many lobbyists do register for both the executive and legislative branches, not all do.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 344. House Bill 313, Delegate Novotny.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Atterbury and members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Delegate Reed Novotny, and I represent Howard and Carroll counties. Currently, there are 19 states that allow recall elections of their elected officials, and Maryland is not one of them. What I'm proposing is to allow the citizens of Maryland to vote on the state constitutional amendment. This will allow a process to recall most elected officials from our governor to the members of the General Assembly, all the way down to our local Board of Elections, our Board of Educations, excuse me. I know that recall elections can be abused. My legislative suggestion is that the petition cannot be filed within the first 120 days of that person assuming office, making it about 6 months after the election in most cases, and must contain 25% of the number of votes cast in that immediately preceding election for that office, thus setting the bar high to avoid overuse. If the number of signatures on the petition are collected, the special recall election vote would have 2 questions. Do you want to recall this official? If that passes, who would you like to replace that official with? This is a single process to reduce the complexity and cost overall of the election. Again, as if the legislature approved this bill, it would allow for voters of Maryland to decide if they want to have the ability to recall elected officials. I believe if done right, it strengthens our representative democracy by keeping us all accountable to our constituents during the time of elections and during the time in between our elections. I want to thank you for your time and ask for a favorable report. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Wilkins has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Novotny, for bringing this bill for consideration. I did have one question, and because I know that the bill includes pretty much it's a wide array of from city council to county council, all the way up to governor. And I was just wondering, you mentioned it being a high bar. I know that we have some municipalities that maybe have about 400 people. So let's say 200 or 300 of them actually vote in the election. So that means if you're looking at 25%, that's very, very few people. I think it's pretty easy to get, 100 or so people together if you have a grievance that maybe even could be a minor grievance, and sort of recall that person. So I'm just wondering about just the disruption. If you've thought about, other ways for areas that have a lower number of people, the bar wouldn't be too high in terms of being able to do a recall, and if there are thoughts that you have around how that could be addressed.
Delegate, that is an excellent question. I have thought through it. I stuck with the percentage model just because, as you know, getting a higher percentage of people to turn out in a general election or an election in these small locations, in my mind, would mean you would have the same amount of problem getting a recall election. So if you only have 400 or 300 people who come to the original vote, you will have a similar challenge to get 25% of those to make that vote. Even if the election petition was successful and you had a recall, again, it's getting those people out and the 2-step process. Do you want to recall this person? Again, hopefully my intent is not to create a nuisance in the process. Open for any suggestion if there's a better way to do that specifically, but it's all based on the turnout, like you noticed and like you said, and I think the bar is higher. It's actually more than twice what California's percentage is, but thank you so much for the question.
Thank you, Delegate.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House 313. House Bill 445, Delegate Smith.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman. Always great to be back with my Ways and Means family. For the record, my name is Delegate Stephanie Smith, and I bring greetings to both you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Washington, and the full committee. This bill, House Bill 445, it's a very simple bill that's really about ensuring that the public adequately understands the publication and communications related to tax rates, particularly the constant yield tax rate. This bill is really seeking to address confusion that can arise when a county or municipality publishes in a newspaper, for example, as required under state law, any change or update in the constant yield tax rate. Even if they're expressing that there is no change, the wording to date can be a little clunky, and we want to tighten it up to be more express, to say, yes, this is maintained. No, this is modified. It's very much just a cleanup bill. And so I do beg the support of the committee in support of House Bill 445. It's just about improving our communication as government with our residents to ensure that they understand what we're doing. And so with that, I thank you for your time, and I believe there will be some testimony.
Yes, thank you, Delegate Smith. Next, we have Councilman Eric Costello.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This is my first time requesting a bill or testifying in front of the General Assembly in about 7.5 years in office.
Well, welcome.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I chair the committee on the City Council for the past 5.5 years, which deals with our budget, previously budget and appropriations, currently Ways and Means. Every single year, we have passed a balanced budget. That budget does not increase the real property tax rate, as Delegate Smith alluded to, or as referred to, the constant yield tax rate. There is language that is required by state code, which we publish in the Baltimore Sun every year, which is extremely confusing and leads to the conclusion that we have raised real property taxes when we have not done that in Baltimore City for at least the last 13 or 14 years. So there is very few things that drive me crazier than this, and fielding those constituent calls every single year explaining that we are in fact not raising real property taxes. Because of those reasons, I'm humbly asking for your support today. This bill clarifies that language and makes it very simple for folks to understand. Thank you for your consideration. Happy to answer any questions, ma'am.
Thank you. Next, we have Justin Fiore for 2 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Justin Fiore, here on behalf of the Maryland Municipal League and in support of House Bill 445. Building on the prior remarks, constant yield tax notices are harmful to the relationship between local governments and their residents. They are confusing and oftentimes dishonest. Whatever good they were intended for has taken a backseat to frustration by all parties. I also want to note that Delegate McKay has introduced similar legislation to this bill as well. So this is very much a statewide issue with support from all corners. There's a good case to reform constant yield beyond just the notice process, and I'd be happy to participate in that conversation as well. But for reasons of fairness and clarity, and to prevent further harm to local governments' relationships, we would request a favorable report on House Bill 445.
Thank you. And last, Kevin Canali, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Kevin Canali here on behalf of the Maryland Association of Counties in support of House Bill 445. You have my written testimony. I'll make a few brief remarks. I want to echo everything that you've already heard. You know, under current law, we do have to advertise and hold hearings on these proposals to enact a tax rate that exceeds constant yield, but our residents don't know what constant yield means. And the advertising requirements are confusing. When you say, you know, it includes notice of tax increase, you're not increasing the rate, but people certainly think you are. So we think while this bill does keep the advertisement requirements in place, the bill replaces misleading and deceiving language with a more accurate description of local fiscal considerations. I think this is easier for people to understand, and it improves government transparency and accountability. I also agree with my colleague from the Municipal League that I think there's a broader conversation on all of this and whether or not this is effective. But for this bill, I think it moves the ball forward in a way that makes it easy to understand for our constituents. And that's the ultimate goal. So with that, we support House Bill 445 and ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. I see a couple questions. We will start with Delegate Long, then Delegate Buckle.
The new word for today is clanky. I believe Delegate Smith said, is that correct? Was it clanky?
I said kind of clunky. I don't know. I speak extemporaneously. I very rarely remember what I just said minutes prior. So
well, I know it was something close to that. You know, I agree with you. The constant yield rate never changes in Baltimore County or Baltimore City, but people don't realize that the county and the city and other jurisdictions can actually lower the constant yield rate to keep property taxes from going up. Because of assessment and the way the assessed value is processed in the state, it goes by sales, and property and in the real world goes up each year in value because of commodity or whatever. But real estate appreciates, and the problem I have is that the constant yield rate, if we were going to truly have truth in taxing, we would also say that the county could possibly, or the local jurisdictions could lower the constant yield rate and stop, depending on all the assessed values going up, depending on more revenue being generated with taxes. When in reality, the state portion of the taxes is so low, even if the assessed value does go up, it doesn't affect the property taxes that much. In Baltimore County and Baltimore City and other jurisdictions, the real problem is when the assessed value goes up, the property taxes go up tremendously because of the constant because of the assessed value. And I agree. I think we do need to be more to clarify what the constant yield rate means and how it could be lowered. And I might make a suggestion. I'm very conservative when it comes to spending. Instead of our local jurisdictions counting on the assessments going up, how about let's working towards lowering the budgets and lowering the constant yield rate, because property taxes are going through the roof. People in my district are struggling, to try to make ends meet, and assessed values go up. I mean, that's the way it is. And it's not the state that's causing property taxes to go up as much as they have. It's the local jurisdictions. Wouldn't you agree?
I like how you did that, Delegate Long.
That's
I was
Frank
waiting
Turner
for
style.
it.
Yes.
I was waiting
Isn't
for
that
it.
so? I agree, Madam Chair, if I might, I do agree that the constant yield rate does need, people need to be more informed what it is and what it does. And they also need to be informed that the constant yield rate can be lowered. And it hasn't been lowered in Baltimore County in over 35 years. And Baltimore City, I don't even know. Truth in taxing, I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Long. Delegate Buckle.
So thank you. So, I saw Delegate Smith the other night socially. I was hoping that our bill, I have a bill on the type of property tax notice requirements. I was hoping it was going to do the same thing. So as Pittsburgh Steelers fans, we could unite in passing this bipartisan Steeler-friendly bill. But I think, I'm not positive because it does get confusing. I think our bills do different things, because I think that, what my concern is, I've never been a local elected official. I appreciate the local elected officials who say, my constituents get mad at me because it says I'm raising their property taxes when I don't think I am. But, I saw what SStat sent to us, and they have a very simple line, 2 lines. I'm just going to read, and I'm wondering what the reaction is. This bill requires taxing authorities to publish a title that may be confusing to citizens. When a taxing authority maintains the current tax rate, but exceeds the constant yield rate, meaning assessments went up, this is a tax increase. And I got to be honest with you, I think that's true. My concern is more about the property owner who says, I owned a property that was assessed at $200,000. I'm not selling the property. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't realize any value to the property. I didn't get a capital gain. I'm going to live here for the next 15 years and raise my kids here, for example. Now the property assessment goes up to $250,000, and I'm told that my taxes stay the same, but my bill goes up. Even though maybe my finances didn't change, my job didn't go up, I didn't get a raise in the last couple of years, but I owe Allegheny County, Maryland, an extra $1,000 more than I owed them last year, $750, because they say that my property is worth more to me. Do we think that it's fair to not advise people that your actual bill is going up? I mean, I agree. All this statutory stuff, I compared your bill to my bill. They're all drafted by DLS. God love DLS. They're smart people, but it is confusing as hell, quite frankly. I mean, it's confusing to read your bill versus my bill and who's doing what. I wish we could just do something that says your tax bill will go up if your assessment has risen. And if your assessment has stayed the same or gone down, your tax bill will not go up because the rate stays the same. Is there any way we could come to some compromise on that kind of language, you think?
My dear friend, Delegate Buckle, have you had the bill hearing for your bill yet?
I have not. It's going to be very similar to this one, except like a different twist.
Okay, I can't account for all the twists in your bill. I can't account for it, but it sounds like you may have a sponsor amendment of your own for your own bill, and you have ample time to request it.
I was thinking we merge them all together and make the notice like plain English, because I get what Councilman Costello and others are saying, that it's confusing. People think that I raised their tax rate.
Right.
But it's also confusing when you say, oh no, I didn't raise your tax rate at all, but your bill went up. When you say, well, how much do I have to pay? Well, I had to pay more. I'd like to find a way that maybe we can work together to just in plain English say that and say, look, if your assessment goes up, you're paying more money. If your assessment doesn't go up or stay the same, you're not paying more money because I'm not raising your rate whatsoever. And so that was my only question or comment. So I appreciate that. And maybe we can keep working on it throughout the session. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to recognize that Councilman Costello appeared to want to respond to Delegate Buckle. I just wanted to flag that.
Sure.
Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, thank you for the question. I think it's analogous to water billing, for example, right? So when we increase water billing rates every 3 years, we will send out a notice to people. However, if you use more water during a 1 month period, your bill will go up because your rate of consumption has increased, but your rate has not in fact changed. We do send out 2 notices per year for most residential properties that you're basically explaining what your tax rate is and how much you owe the city every 6 months. So certainly understand where you're coming from.
And I appreciate that. I think it makes some sense. It just, to me, it seems more common sense. I mean, people, you would hope, everybody's different. You would hope they have a basic understanding of, you charge me 10 cents per gallon, whatever it is. And if I use 100,000 gallons, I can do the math, or, I can pull out my calculator, wherever that is, to do the math. One of the issues with the constant yield, I mean, the language is very confusing. We're all in agreement on that. It's just very confusing. And that's one of my concerns, is that your average homeowner doesn't really, your perspective is, which sounds reasonable, they read it and they think you're raising their taxes. And you're saying, I'm not raising your taxes. I'm telling you that the value of your house, that SStat has determined that the value of your house has gone up, or your property. And so as a result, I'm charging you the same amount on a wealthier property. I just don't think sometimes people really appreciate that. You can change, Delegate Log said, you can change the rate. So that's what constant yield really means, obviously, is that you can change the rate so that you get the exact same amount of money off of that property as what you did under its prior assessment. But they also don't really understand that at the end of the day, if you don't sell the house or the property, you're not really realizing that increased assessed value from it, but you're constantly paying more money. I'm just a big believer. I don't want anybody to call Councilman Eric Costello and say, you son of a gun, you raised my taxes, because that's not true. But I do want them to have an understanding of, my taxes are going up through the function of the system, without having to be so confused about it, which people seem to be. That's my only point, I guess.
Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate, totally understand and appreciate your perspective. I would add that despite not selling the property, you do have the ability to leverage against that property, whether it's a home equity loan or of the sort, but certainly appreciate your perspective. Thank you. And Delegate, please forgive my facial expressions. This is exponentially more collegial than what I'm used to on a daily basis. So
we try hard. Thank you very much. I appreciate your sentiments. Thank you.
Could have been in my previous committee, Councilman. 7 years in judiciary wasn't this collegial. Delegate Lasanti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to the sponsor, Delegate Smith, thank you very much. As a former municipal government official, I've spent thousands of hours on the phone trying to explain constant yield and this advertising to private citizens. But I really am interested about one thing as far as the restrictive nature of the actual publication. We have had various pieces of legislation over the years to deal with the issue of publicizing in a newspaper of general circulation. Number one, I think we have passed some other laws that give a little bit of flexibility for those communities where there really isn't a circulating newspaper any longer. And the second piece of that is, even if you read a little farther, it must be an 18-point text and for the newspaper advertisement and that kind of stuff. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts while we're opening this bill to make it a little more user-friendly in the language. Could we also maybe take a look at the publication, newspaper publication requirements?
Thank you, Delegate. I think that is, a very worthwhile observation. I mean, I'm open to modernizing maybe, the platforms by which we communicate with the public. So I think that's a very good point.
Okay, I'll follow up with you after. Thanks a lot.
Want to comment? Councilman, your hand's up. Did you want to comment or your hand's just up? Okay. I saw Delegate Long, you took your hand down. Are you good? Okay. Are there any further questions on House Bill 445? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the testimony on House Bill 445. Thank you. Delegate Smith, you have our last bill for the day, House Bill 449, and whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Delegate Stephanie Smith here in support of House Bill 449. Thank you to committee members for your indulgence for this last bill. This is, I think, a feel-good bill. It's a way that we can bring relief to some of our most vulnerable neighbors and friends. This is a bill that's designed to provide a tax credit for seniors, those aged 70 and over, but are renting. And as we know that many of our seniors that are renting are often in very economically precarious conditions that have only been further jeopardized by the pandemic we found ourselves in. And so this it gives a retroactive up to 3 years application of a renter's tax credit for seniors age 70 and over. And this will also provide an opportunity for those senior renters to just have a little more stabilization, because many times seniors want to age in place, whether that's a home that they owned for 50 years or a place where they've been renting and otherwise creating relationships. Anything that can keep our seniors in place, aging not only with dignity, but comfort, I believe we should be eager to extend those opportunities. So, in my written testimony, I elaborate on the situations that Maryland seniors who rent are experiencing. Many of them are dealing with household costs that are averaging $11.29 per month. And this is for those that are asset limited, income restrained, but employed. We're talking the ALICE population. So I'm hoping that you will see fit, as I have, to figure out how we can support those seniors aged 70 and over who are renting by not only extending this renter's tax credit to them, but also making sure that it's retroactive 3 years over this very challenging time that we find ourselves in. Now, I want to also mention that in conversation with SSTAT, that we're a little concerned about, the application of this going into effect this year. We worked together to extend the effective date until 2023. So that would be the only amendment as a sponsor that I'm offering on this, in consultation with the state, to ensure that they have enough ramp up time to extend this tax credit to seniors. So without further ado, I do hope that I can receive support for House Bill 449.
Thank you. Next, Jamelia Blake for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Jamila Blake, and I'm a SOAR counselor with Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. SOAR stands for Securing Older Adults with Resources. My role is to connect older adults with housing and social service resources that will keep them in their home. We serve older adults not only in Baltimore City, but throughout the state of Maryland. I'm here today to speak to you about House Bill number 449, which deals with retroactive credits for older adults 70 and over. I want you to know I support this bill because I've worked with a number of older adults that have faced housing difficulties or eviction due to their limited income. Many older adults I serve only live on their Social Security and sometimes don't have enough funds to pay their rent. This bill would help reduce evictions amongst our older adults in Maryland. This bill is important to me because I have a client that currently lives in Baltimore County with her husband, and both are over 70. She and her husband have been married for 45 years and both are retired. She currently receives dialysis, uses a walker, and has limited vision. I've assisted her and her husband with applying for the renter's tax credit since 2020. This credit helps them stay with their current landlord that they've been renting from for 30 years. The credit has also allowed them to put money aside to pay for their rising medication costs. Many times this couple would debate if they should go without certain medications or pay their rent. The retroactive credit would help them and other tenants like them enormously with the yearly increase they face with their rent and provide them with more financial security. Thank you for your time, and I urge you to vote favorably on House Bill 449.
Thank you. Next, Marceline White, please, for 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Marceline White. I am the Executive Director of the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, MCRC, and MCRC advances economic rights and equity through research, education, awareness raising, and direct service. As you heard from my colleague, Ms. Jamila Blake, we are both here in strong support of House Bill 449, and I want to thank Delegate Smith for offering it. As noted, what this bill does is it's very simple. This committee has heard already this year about the homeowner's tax credit and had a briefing on this. This is the companion bill. Maryland has had a renter's tax credit in place for a number of years for low-income renters, but unlike the homeowner's tax credit, they've not been able to apply these credits retroactively. For age 70 years or older. This will do this. It will help provide financial security for our elders and will allow them to stay in their apartments and age in place. Ms. Blake talked a lot about some of the people we see. We do know that in terms of our tenant hotline, about 45% of the calls we've gotten this year from older adults have been because they've been struggling to make their rent with rising housing costs. Again, this kind of tax credit will assist them in being able to do so. There is a small increase in expenditures, but we think the good of this far outweighs those expenditures in terms of keeping people housed, keeping landlords paid, and providing our older adults with the financial supports they need after a lifetime of living and working in this state. So we do ask for a favorable report, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
And is there someone here from legal aid? We did not get a name.
Yes, Chairperson.
Okay, whenever you're ready, go ahead, please.
Sure. My name is Gregory Callis. I'm an attorney with Maryland Legal Aid. As the members of the committee may be aware, Maryland Legal Aid serves low-income Marylanders in a number of subject areas, including landlord-tenant actions and expungements, as well as for children in need of assistance. I'd like to thank the delegate for introducing this bill, and Maryland Legal Aid asks this committee to vote favorably on it. I would, again, echo the comments from the previous panelists, and would add this these additional comments. One, 48% of older adults in Maryland are under the poverty line. So therefore, this bill that extends the period for application will assist these very vulnerable Marylanders in getting additional income, which would help to support the payment of additional rent, as well as other costs that will help to keep them stable. I would also say that I believe in 2014, this bill was amended to require that the department market this in areas where there was a acute poverty. And one of the reasons for that was because, the benefits are not well known to folks who are in fact poor. So the additional time, even if it's only limited to seniors, helps a very vulnerable population to get the word and to be able to retroactively make a claim for these tax credits. And for those reasons, we would ask this committee to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for any of the witnesses or the bill sponsor? Okay, seeing none, thank you. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 449. If committee members could just hang tight while we let everyone else go, and Haley, you can let me know when we are no longer